from topping the charts with beautiful girls to walking out of a courtroom in handcuffs. Sean Kingston's story is one of the most shocking downfalls in modern music. At just 17 years old, he was living every teenager's dream: fame, money, and global recognition. But fast forward to today, and instead of selling out shows, he's facing years behind bars for a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme that stunned fans and left prosecutors calling him a con man. What went so wrong for the once beloved hitmaker? And how did the world spotlight turn into the courtroom spotlight? Back in 2007, the world was introduced to a teenager with a smooth voice and a catchy tune that would instantly become a global hit. Sean Kingston, born Kezian Paul Anderson, broke onto the scene with Beautiful Girls. The song was everywhere, on the radio, blasting through speakers at parties, and climbing to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. With his Jamaican-American roots and his sound that blended reggae, pop, and hip-hop, Kingston stood out as something fresh in an era crowded with artists trying to find their lane. Almost overnight, he went from an unknown kid to an international star. He was 17 years old, living the fantasy most people could only dream of. He followed up with more hits like Take You There and Fire Burning, proving he wasn't just a one-hit wonder. By his late teens, he was rubbing shoulders with some of the biggest names in the industry and living in luxury mansions most adults couldn't even imagine affording. But fame at a young age comes with a price. The spotlight was bright, the money was flowing fast, and Sean Kingston quickly got a taste for the lavish lifestyle. Private parties, exotic cars, diamond watches, and designer clothes became part of his everyday image. For a while, it seemed like the dream would never end. What nobody realized back then was that the very lifestyle that made him look untouchable would later become the thing that dragged him down. As Sean Kingston's career climbed, so did his appetite for luxury. He wasn't just buying things. He was collecting symbols of wealth. Cars with six-figure price tags, diamond-encrusted watches, designer clothes flown in from overseas. It all became part of his identity. On social media and in interviews, Kingston projected the image of someone who had it all and wasn't afraid to flaunt it. But behind the glamour, cracks were forming. Prosecutors later described him as someone addicted to his celebrity lifestyle, even after the money wasn't there to support it. He wanted to live like the superstar he once was, but the reality was different. Record sales slowed, radio hits dried up, and the millions he once had started to fade. Still, Kingston wasn't ready to give up the image. Instead of scaling back, he doubled down. Every new purchase, every flashy car or jewelry piece was a reminder that he was still relevant. But to keep that illusion alive, he needed more than fame. He needed a way to get luxury without paying for it. And that's when the story takes a darker turn. According to investigators, Sean Kingston didn't just fall behind on bills. He developed a full-on scheme to keep his luxury lifestyle going without ever opening his wallet. From April 2023 to March 2024, Kingston and his mother, Janice Turner, targeted sellers of high-end goods with a carefully crafted routine. It usually started on social media. Sellers of luxury cars, watches, or custom electronics would get a message from Kingston himself. And to most people, a celebrity sliding into your DMs is the opportunity of a lifetime. He promised exposure, connections, and payment, deals that sounded too good to turn down. Once the sellers agreed, Kingston would invite them to one of his lavish Florida mansions. Imagine walking into a multi-million-dollar home, being greeted by a star you grew up listening to, and hearing him say he wants to showcase your product to millions of fans. To the victims, it felt like a golden ticket. But here's where things unraveled. When it came time to pay, Kingston or his mother would send over what looked like legitimate wire transfer receipts. The problem? They were fake. The money never arrived. And by the time the sellers realized, their merchandise, from a bulletproof Escalade to luxury watches to a massive 19-foot LED TV, was already gone. Some victims kept chasing him for payment. Others tried to sue. But for many, the story was the same. Sean Kingston got what he wanted, while they were left with nothing but frustration. And the scheme didn't just involve one or two deals. Prosecutors described it as a pattern, a years-long strategy of bullying sellers, using his fame to pressure them, and then walking away without paying a dime. But no matter how carefully he tried to play the game, you can only run a scheme like that for so long before everything comes crashing down. By May 2024, the investigation had reached its boiling point. Federal authorities weren't dealing with late payments or civil lawsuits anymore. They were dealing with a full-blown fraud case. And when the hammer came down, it came down hard. A SWAT team stormed Sean Kingston's rented mansion in suburban Fort Lauderdale. Neighbors watched in disbelief as armed officers surrounded the property. Inside, they arrested his mother, Janice Turner, on the spot. The raid was a spectacle. Flashing lights, tactical gear, and the shocking image of Kingston's mother being taken into custody from the same home where they had once hosted lavish parties. But Kingston himself wasn't there. At the time of the raid, he was all the way across the country in California, performing at Fort Irwin, a military base in the Mojave Desert. Hours later, he too was placed in handcuffs. For fans, it was surreal. The same man who once performed to screaming crowds was now being walked away by federal agents. Videos and pictures of the arrests spread across social media, leaving people stunned. How could the guy who gave the world beautiful girls end up in a federal fraud case, arrested like a hardened criminal? That question became even bigger once the trial began. When Sean Kingston and his mother finally stood trial in March 2025, the courtroom drama played out like something straight from a movie. Prosecutors painted Kingston as more than just careless with money. They described him as a calculated fraudster who leaned on his celebrity image to take advantage of people. Assistant U.S. Attorney Mark Anton didn't mince words, calling him a thief and a con man, plain and simple. He told the jury Kingston had developed a years-long pattern of tricking people into handing over luxury goods, knowing he had no intention of paying. On the other side, Kingston's defense team tried to rewrite the narrative. His lawyer argued that Kingston still had the mentality of a teenager, the same age he was when fame first hit. According to the defense, he was clueless about finances, surrounded by managers and family members who controlled everything. They claimed Kingston was more naive than malicious, a star who never learned how to handle money and got lost in the superficial world of fame. The judge, however, wasn't buying the idea that Kingston didn't know what he was doing. U.S. Judge David Leibovitz pointed out that Kingston had made choice after choice that showed clear intent. Still, the judge acknowledged one thing in his favor. Kingston accepted responsibility. He didn't testify, which the court saw as a way of avoiding lies that could make a situation even worse. His mother, though, took the opposite approach. She testified on her own behalf, and the judge later described her testimony as obstruction. That difference would end up playing a major role in how their sentences turned out. When the verdict was read, it was clear both Kingston and his mother were convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and multiple counts of wire fraud. But the sentencing, that was where the real shock came. By the summer of 2025, the courtroom had already seen its fair share of drama. First came Janice Turner's fate. In July, Kingston's mother was handed a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting that her testimony during the trial had done her no favors. For many observers, it was a harsh but unsurprising outcome. She had been painted as an active partner in the scheme from the very beginning. Then came Sean Kingston's turn. On August 15th, 2025, he stood before Judge Leibovitz to learn his fate. Wearing a black suit with a white shirt, Kingston looked far removed from the flashy, carefree image fans once knew. His lawyer argued for leniency, even requesting that he be allowed to self-surrender at a later date due to health issues. But the judge wasn't swayed. Kingston was ordered into custody immediately. Before the sentence was read, Kingston addressed the court. In a quiet moment, he apologized and admitted he had learned from his actions. The words may have been sincere, but they weren't enough to change the outcome. Judge Leibovitz sentenced him to 3.5 years in federal prison. As marshals approached, Kingston removed his suit jacket, placed his hands behind his back, and was led away in handcuffs. For someone who once commanded stadiums, it was a humbling and almost surreal image. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Fans online were stunned. 3.5 years. A sharp reminder that even celebrity status can't shield you when the evidence is stacked too high. But while the sentencing brought closure to the case, it opened a much bigger question. What happens next for Sean Kingston? With Sean Kingston now serving time, the conversation has shifted from the courtroom to what his future might look like once he walks free. His attorney told the court that Kingston has already started repaying some of his victims and intends to pay back every cent once he's out and able to work again. But will the world even welcome him back? For fans, the reaction has been split. Some say they grew up with beautiful girls and can't help but feel sympathy for a star who lost control of his life. They argue that Kingston is still young enough to rebuild, maybe even stage a comeback if he learns from his mistakes. Others aren't so forgiving. To them, Kingston isn't a victim of fame. He's a calculated con man who wasted his talent and exploited the trust of people just trying to do business with him. Speculation is already buzzing online about whether he'll use prison time to reflect and reinvent himself. Music history is filled with artists who fell hard, only to make shocking comebacks. But it's just as full of names that disappeared into obscurity after one too many scandals. And then there's the impact on his legacy. For years, Sean Kingston's name was tied to upbeat summer anthems, the kind of songs that instantly transport people back to their teenage years. Now, for many, it's tied just as closely to fraud, deception, and prison bars. The real question is simple but heavy. When the music stops and the lifestyle crumbles, what's left of the superstar persona? For Sean Kingston, only time will tell if this chapter becomes the end of his story, or the setup for an unexpected return. Sean Kingston's journey is a stark reminder that fame and fortune can be fleeting. From teenage stardom and global hits to courtroom drama and federal prison, his story is a roller coaster few could have imagined. It's easy to get caught up in the music, the hits, and the lifestyle, but the reality behind the glitz can be far harsher than anyone expects. His downfall wasn't just about bad choices. It was a collision of unchecked fame, financial naivety, and a hunger to maintain a lifestyle that reality could no longer support. While some fans cling to hope for a comeback, others see this as the final chapter of a career that burned too bright and too fast. In the end, Sean Kingston's story forces a question every fan and observer can't ignore. When the lights fade, the music stops, and the fame is gone, what remains of the superstar we once idolized? For now, the answer lies behind prison doors, and the world watches, wondering if redemption or reinvention is even possible.
Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to stay updated for other celebrity news.